Sergeant Jack Thompson had been away for far too long. The once familiar hum of military life, the endless routines, and the noise of constant operations were all behind him now. He stood on the tarmac, staring at the sprawling small town before him, a far cry from the war zones he'd called home for the past few years. It felt like a dream to be back, but at the same time, it felt like something was missing, something he hadn't fully realized until now. He shifted his weight, feeling the weight of his duffel bag against his back, the creak of his boots on the pavement, and the subtle ache in his chest that never seemed to fade. Jack had served in countless missions, facing dangers and uncertainty, but one thing remained constant through it all: Max, his K-9 partner, his friend. The memory of Max's alert eyes and agile movements flashed in Jack's mind. They'd been a team, the bond between them forged in the heat of battle. Max had been there through thick and thin, providing support in ways Jack could never have predicted. They had both survived countless operations together, sharing in the victories and losses that only soldiers know. But the time had come for Max to retire. It had been a bittersweet farewell, a moment Jack had never truly gotten over. Max had served with distinction, but as the years passed, the strain on his aging body became evident. The military had a retirement plan for its four-legged soldiers, and Max was no different. When Jack was told Max would be put out to pasture, the weight of that decision hit him harder than he expected. Jack wasn't sure what happened after that. He was reassured that Max would be given a good home, perhaps even a family to live with. But something gnawed at him, something that had been eating at his soul ever since they parted ways. Jack had always been told that Max was in good hands, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the dog had been forgotten. No longer the brave soldier, no longer the one who would run into danger for his handler. Jack had no idea where Max ended up or how he was treated. And now here Jack was, back in his quiet town, trying to find a sense of normalcy. As he walked toward the diner, the weight of that thought settled deeper. Was Max out there somewhere, alone and forgotten, living the rest of his days as an afterthought? Jack's chest tightened at the thought. If there was one thing he knew for sure, it was that he would never leave Max behind. But for now, he needed to get some rest. The emotional weight of war had left its mark, and the peace of home was supposed to help ease that. Yet Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that his purpose wasn't quite finished here. With that thought lingering in his mind, Jack made his way to the diner, hoping for a quiet meal. Little did he know, the quiet afternoon was about to turn into something that would change his life and his heart forever. Jack pushed open the door to the diner, the familiar chime of the bell overhead breaking the stillness of the afternoon. The warm air inside enveloped him, carrying the scent of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon. He took a seat at the counter, nodding at the waitress who gave him a tired but welcoming smile. He hadn't been back to this diner in years, but it felt comforting, the way small-town places often did. The hustle and bustle of the city seemed a world away, and for a brief moment, Jack thought that perhaps he could find peace here. "Coffee?" the waitress asked, already reaching for a mug. "Yeah, thanks," Jack replied, his voice a little rough from the travel. His fingers drummed lightly on the counter, restless. It wasn't just the long flight home that had unsettled him. It was the feeling of being disconnected from everything that had once been familiar. The town had changed, and in some ways, so had he. As Jack waited for his coffee, his eyes wandered out the window. The streets outside bathed in the soft glow of the afternoon sun. That's when he saw it. Behind the diner, near a row of trash bins, a small figure moved. At first, Jack thought it was just another stray cat, a familiar sight in any town. But then something caught his attention, something about the way the animal moved. It wasn't the erratic, skittish motion of a street cat or a raccoon, but the determined, methodical approach of a dog searching for food. Jack's heart gave a sudden jolt. He leaned forward, squinting through the glass. The dog's coat was matted and dirty, its ribs visible beneath its fur. The animal was thin, painfully so. Yet despite its obvious condition, there was a certain grace to its movements, a familiarity that tugged at Jack's memory. He didn't want to believe it. Could it really be? Without thinking, he stood and pushed open the door, stepping outside into the warm afternoon. His boots hit the pavement with a soft thud, and he started walking toward the back of the diner. His mind raced as he got closer. He couldn't shake the feeling that he knew this dog. But how? The dog paused, turning its head slightly. Jack's breath hitched in his chest as their eyes met. He knew those eyes. There was no mistaking it. They were the same deep, intelligent eyes that had once scanned battlefields with him, the eyes that had been by his side through every dangerous mission. The dog's face was thinner, older, but it was unmistakably the same dog he had served with for years. "Max," Jack whispered, his voice catching in his throat. He took a slow step forward, not wanting to startle the animal, but needing to know. Max's tail twitched slightly, and the dog's ears perked up. Jack's heart pounded as he crouched down, barely able to believe what he was seeing. For a long moment, the dog didn't move. Jack's chest tightened with a mix of hope and uncertainty. Could it really be Max? The dog hesitated, then took a few slow steps toward him, sniffing the air. Jack's mind flooded with memories, training, missions, and the bond they'd shared. The times Max had saved his life, the countless moments of quiet companionship during the long stretches of desert heat. Max slowly made his way toward Jack, a weak wag of his tail the only sign of recognition. The dog's movements were slow, almost labored, but Jack didn't care. All that mattered was that his partner was standing right in front of him, after all this time. "Max," Jack repeated, his voice barely more than a whisper. He reached out, slowly extending his hand toward the dog, his heart racing with emotion. Max sniffed his hand, then gave it a tentative lick, as if trying to confirm what he already knew. The floodgates opened, and Jack's eyes filled with tears. He had found him. His partner was alive. But at what cost? Max took another step forward, his body frail and trembling. Jack's heart sank as he noticed how much weight the dog had lost. The dirt and debris stuck to his coat. This wasn't the Max he remembered. This Max had been through something terrible. Jack could feel the weight of that truth, but all he could think about in that moment was getting him the help he needed. "You're not alone anymore," Jack promised, his voice thick with emotion. He couldn't believe it. His best friend, his partner, was standing in front of him, but he wasn't going to let him suffer any longer, not on Jack's watch. He carefully reached down, gently stroking Max's fur, knowing their journey together was far from over. Jack knelt down, his hand gently resting on Max's fragile back. The dog leaned into the touch, weak but trusting. Every muscle in Jack's body seemed to tighten with a mix of relief and anger. How could this have happened? How could anyone, allow Max to end up like this? The dog he had once known, strong, confident, always by his side, was now nothing more than a shell of his former self. The memories came rushing back in waves, overwhelming Jack with the intensity of them. He thought about the first time he met Max, fresh out of training, still a pup with a wild spark in his eyes. Jack had been assigned as the dog's handler, and from the very beginning, they had a connection. Max was sharp, quick to learn, and fiercely loyal. Jack had never been alone when Max was around. On the battlefield, they were a team, surviving together in ways that no human could do alone. They had faced gunfire side by side, fought off enemies, and rescued their fellow soldiers in moments of danger. Max had been there, always one step ahead, always knowing what Jack needed before he could even say a word. Jack could remember the way Max had sensed danger even when it was miles away. The bond they shared wasn't just built on training or the commands Jack gave. It was built on a deep, almost unspoken understanding. Max had been more than a dog. He had been Jack's protector, his friend, his family. The day Max was retired felt like a blow to Jack's chest. The decision had come from higher up, of course. Max was getting older, his joints were aching, and his once sharp senses were beginning to dull. It wasn't a decision Jack could argue with, but it didn't make it any easier. The military had a retirement plan for their K-9 units, and while Jack was assured that Max would be placed in a loving home, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he was letting his partner down. Max had served his country, put his life on the line time and time again, and now Jack was supposed to walk away. It had been one of the hardest goodbyes of his life. As the memories played in Jack's mind, He looked at Max, his once proud coat now dirty and matted, his bones protruding through his thin fur. Jack's heart twisted in pain. This wasn't the dog he remembered. This wasn't the partner who had jumped into action without hesitation, who had trusted Jack completely. No, this was a dog who had suffered, alone, forgotten. Max, Jack murmured, his voice catching in his throat. What happened to you? He felt the tears threatening to fall, but he held them back. He couldn't fall apart now. Not when Max needed him. He gently ran his fingers through the dog's fur, his mind reeling with questions. Where had Max been? Had he been abandoned by the military? Or had he been adopted by a family that no longer cared for him? How long had Max been out on the streets, left to fend for himself in the harsh world that Jack knew all too well? Jack's thoughts swirled as he stood up, looking down at Max. The dog was still weak, his body trembling slightly, but there was a fire in his eyes, a spark of recognition that Jack refused to ignore. It was the same look Max had given him countless times on the battlefield. It was a look that said, I'm here. I'm with you. That was all Jack needed to see. No matter how long it took, no matter the obstacles ahead, Jack was determined to give Max the life he deserved. This time, Jack would not fail his partner. He would be the one to help Max recover, to make sure he would never have to face the darkness alone again. Come on, buddy, Jack whispered, his voice full of resolve. He carefully helped Max to his feet, steadying the dog as he wobbled. Jack knew the road to recovery wouldn't be easy. Max had a long way to go, physically and emotionally. But together, they would get there. Together, they would heal. As they walked back toward the diner, Jack's mind raced with plans. The first step was getting Max to a vet, getting him the medical attention he so desperately needed. After that, he'd figure out what had happened to him. He wasn't going to let the people who had failed Max get away with it. But for now, Jack was just focused on one thing, getting Max to safety, back to the life he deserved. And Jack would be with him every step of the way. Jack's hands were still shaking as he carefully guided Max toward his truck. The dog's legs were unsteady, his body thin and frail, but Jack could feel the familiar warmth of Max's presence, the comfort that only a true companion could provide. Jack had almost forgotten what it felt like to have his partner by his side, to trust that Max would be there for him no matter what. It wasn't just the dog's physical condition that tore at Jack's heart. It was the realization that for all these years, Max had been out there alone, forgotten by everyone but him. Max stumbled slightly as they walked, his steps uncertain, but Jack kept him close, murmuring quiet words of encouragement. It's okay, buddy. We're almost there. Jack's voice was low and soothing, but his heart was heavy. He couldn't help but wonder how long Max had been suffering like this. Had it been days? Weeks? Longer? Every question felt like a sharp sting, but Jack pushed it aside. There was no time for self-pity. The only thing that mattered now was Max. When they reached the truck, Jack hesitated for just a moment before gently lifting Max into the backseat. Max didn't resist, though his eyes were filled with a mix of exhaustion and relief. Jack shut the door softly, trying to keep his composure. He could feel the weight of the moment, the weight of their bond, and the deep desire to make things right. He'd been away for so long, but now that he had Max back, he wasn't going to let anything separate them again. The drive to the local vet felt like it took forever. Jack kept glancing at Max in the rearview mirror, watching the dog's labored breathing, the way his head drooped. Jack's stomach twisted with guilt and frustration. How had he missed this? Why hadn't he known that Max was out there suffering? He should have been the one to protect him, just like they had always done for each other. As they pulled into the vet's parking lot, Jack parked quickly and got out of the truck. He hurried around to the back to open the door for Max, who was lying still in the seat, his eyes half closed. Jack's heart raced. Come on, Max, he whispered, his voice cracking slightly. We're here. Max didn't move at first. Jack took a deep breath, trying to keep his emotions in check, before gently lifting the dog into his arms. Max's body felt light, almost fragile in his hold. He moved quickly, walking into the vet's office with a sense of urgency, the door opening with a soft chime. The staff immediately noticed the condition Max was in, and the receptionist rushed to greet him. Is he okay? she asked, concern flashing across her face. Jack nodded, but his voice was tight. He's been through a lot, Jack said quietly. He was my K-9 partner. I think he's been abandoned. Please, can you help him? The vet, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, came forward to take a closer look. She glanced at Jack and then at Max, her expression softening. We'll do our best, she reassured him. Let's get him into the exam room. Jack felt a small sense of relief as they led Max to the back. He knew that the dog was in capable hands now, but that didn't stop the worry from eating at him. How long had Max been on the streets? What kind of toll had it taken on him physically and emotionally? Jack's mind raced with the possibilities, but for now, all he could do was wait. As he sat in the waiting room, Jack's thoughts turned back to the last time he had seen Max. The last time they'd been together had been months ago, when Max had been retired and Jack had reluctantly left him behind. They had parted ways with promises of a bright future, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he had let Max down. Seeing the dog in this condition now confirmed that he had, in a way. The guilt was almost overwhelming, but Jack wasn't going to let it consume him. He had found Max again, and that was all that mattered. The minutes ticked by slowly, but soon the vet emerged, her face serious. He's been through quite a lot, she said softly. He's malnourished, and he's got a few injuries, but with time and care, he should be able to recover. Jack felt a surge of relief flood through him, but it was quickly replaced by an overwhelming determination. He wasn't going to let Max down again. He was going to be there for him, no matter what it took. Thank you, Jack whispered, his voice thick with emotion. We'll take it from here. The hours after the vet visit felt like a blur. Jack had taken Max home, carefully setting up a comfortable space for him in his living room. He'd pulled out all the stops, blankets, soft cushions, and bowls of water and food within easy reach. Max, though still weak, had settled into the corner, curling up in a ball, his head resting on his paws. Jack could see the exhaustion in the dog's eyes, but there was something else there too, something that gave him hope. The spark that had been missing during their time apart was slowly returning. Jack sat on the couch across from Max, watching him with a mixture of concern and quiet determination. He couldn't stop thinking about everything Max had been through. How could anyone abandon a dog like him? How could anyone forget the loyal K-9 who had saved lives time and time again? The question burned inside Jack, but he pushed it down. There would be time for answers later. Right now, Max needed him. The evening light streamed through the window, casting long shadows across the room. Jack ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of the day pressing down on him. His heart ached as he watched Max's slow, shallow breathing. The vet had said Max had a long road ahead, but she was hopeful. Jack had to believe that too. You're going to be okay, buddy, Jack murmured, his voice thick with emotion. He couldn't bear the thought of losing Max again, not after finally finding him. I'm not going to let anything happen to you. I promise. Max's ears perked up at the sound of Jack's voice, and he lifted his head slightly, his tired eyes meeting Jack's. For a moment, they just stared at each other, and Jack could see the trust in those eyes, the same trust that had always been there. Despite everything Max had been through, despite the pain and the hunger, he still believed in Jack, and Jack wasn't going to let him down. I won't leave you, Jack continued, his voice growing more resolute. I'm going to make sure you get back to being the dog you were. We're going to get you strong again. You're not alone anymore, Max. I'll take care of you, I swear. Max's tail twitched slightly and Jack smiled, though the smile didn't quite reach his eyes. It wasn't just a promise to Max, it was a promise to himself. He had failed his partner once, but he wasn't going to make the same mistake again. Jack would do whatever it took to make Max feel safe and loved again, to give him the life he deserved. That night, Jack stayed up late, researching ways to help Max recover. He found a list of foods to help with Max's malnutrition, as well as exercises to help strengthen his muscles. There were so many things Jack hadn't known about caring for a retired K-9, but he wasn't going to let that stop him. Max had always been there for him. Now it was his turn to be there for Max. In the days that followed, Jack kept a close eye on Max. He made sure the dog ate the right food, took short walks with him around the yard, and gave him plenty of attention and affection. Each day, Max seemed a little stronger, his steps a little steadier. The transformation was slow, but it was real. Jack could see it in the way Max's eyes brightened when they went outside, the way he wagged his tail, even if it was only a little. One morning, Jack woke up to find Max sitting at the foot of his bed, his head tilted slightly to one side, as if waiting for Jack to wake up and start the day. Jack blinked, a smile tugging at his lips. Max was still a long way from being the dog he had once been, but he was making progress, and so was Jack. "Good morning, buddy," Jack said softly, his voice full of affection. "Ready for another day?" Max gave a quiet whine, his tail wagging, and Jack felt a surge of warmth in his chest. This was just the beginning. The road ahead would be long and filled with challenges, but they would face it together. And no matter what came their way, Jack knew one thing for sure. Max would never be alone again. Jack would keep his promise. Max had been there for him when it mattered most, and now it was Jack's turn to do the same. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, Max began to show signs of improvement. Jack kept a close watch on him, carefully following the vet's advice and making sure Max got the proper nourishment and exercise. Every small victory, whether it was a little more energy in Max's step or the soft wag of his tail, felt like a huge triumph to Jack. But the journey was far from easy. There were still moments when Max seemed exhausted, when he would collapse after a short walk, his breathing heavy, his body aching. Jack would sit beside him, gently petting him and reminding him that they were in this together. Jack had taken time off from work, unsure of how long Max would need his full attention. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more going on beneath the surface. Max wasn't just recovering physically, there was something else, something deeper that Jack couldn't quite pinpoint. The dog's eyes would often reflect a sadness, a weariness that went beyond physical pain. It wasn't just the toll of the streets, Jack realized. Max had been through something traumatic. He had been abandoned, alone, and left to survive on his own. It was during one of their evening walks that Jack began to understand just how much Max had changed, not just in his physical state, but emotionally. They were walking slowly around the yard, Max's steps still hesitant but improving. Suddenly, Max froze in his tracks. Jack looked down, noticing how the dog's ears were perked, his body rigid. "What's wrong, boy?" Jack asked, his voice calm, trying to reassure Max. He followed Max's gaze and his stomach dropped. There, just outside the fence, a group of kids had gathered, laughing and playing. The sight of them sent a wave of anxiety through Max, his body tensing further, his eyes darting nervously. It was clear that Max was triggered by something, maybe the loud noise, or perhaps the chaos of their play. But it was a reminder that this wasn't just about physical healing. Max had been through more than Jack realized, and the emotional scars were just as real as the physical ones. Jack crouched down beside Max, speaking softly to him. "It's okay, buddy. You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you." Slowly, Max relaxed, though he still kept his eyes on the children with suspicion. It was then that Jack understood. Max wasn't just recovering from being abandoned. He was recovering from the trauma of those lost months, the uncertainty and fear he had lived with every day. For the first time, Jack felt the weight of the true responsibility he had taken on. It wasn't just about getting Max healthy again physically. It was about helping him trust again, helping him heal emotionally. Max needed patience, gentleness, and understanding. It would take time, but Jack was determined to give him all the time he needed. The following days were a mix of small steps forward and occasional setbacks. Jack made sure to expose Max to new experiences slowly, trying not to overwhelm him. They'd go on quiet walks, sometimes just sitting together in the backyard, giving Max time to adjust to the world around him. Jack avoided any crowded places, knowing that Max wasn't ready for the chaos of the outside world just yet. They were on Max's timeline now, not the world's. As Max began to show more signs of stability, Jack took him for a few trips to the park, always choosing times when it was quieter, less crowded. Jack wanted Max to feel secure, to know that it was okay to relax again. Slowly but surely, Max started to show a bit more confidence. He'd wag his tail when they reached the park, his steps a little faster, his eyes more alert and curious instead of wary and frightened. One evening, after a particularly successful trip to the park, Jack sat on the porch, Max lying beside him. The dog's head rested on Jack's leg, his eyes closed in contentment. The bond they shared was stronger than ever. Jack had seen so many soldiers return home from war, but he knew his journey with Max was far from over. The road to recovery was long, but it wasn't just Max who was healing. It was Jack too. Together, they were learning to trust again, to find peace, and to move forward. Jack leaned down, gently scratching behind Max's ears. "We're getting there, buddy, one step at a time." And for the first time in what felt like forever, Jack believed it. They had a future together, a future where they could heal and live in peace. It had been months since Max had first stepped into Jack's home, his body frail, his spirit broken. Now, as the days passed, Jack began to see a transformation that went beyond just physical recovery. Max was becoming his old self again, stronger, more alert, and even a little more playful at times. Though the shadows of his past still lingered in his eyes, the spark Jack had once known in his partner was slowly returning. But as Max healed, Jack's thoughts were consumed by something that had been gnawing at him since their reunion. How did Max end up like this? He had to know the truth. Something about the way Max had been abandoned didn't sit right with Jack, and he couldn't let go of the feeling that there was more to the story. Jack started asking around, reaching out to old contacts from his time in the military. He contacted the K-9 unit, hoping to get some answers. What he learned didn't sit well with him. Max had been retired from the military just a few months before being found on the streets. According to the records Jack dug up, the decision to retire Max had come from the higher-ups, and it had been a routine move. But what bothered Jack was the lack of follow-up. The military had placed Max in what was supposed to be a loving home. But after that, there had been no contact, no updates, no checks to make sure Max was settling in well. It was as if once Max was out of the military, he was forgotten. Max didn't deserve this, Jack muttered to himself, clenching his fists. He couldn't believe that the very people who had trained him, who had depended on him, had abandoned him so easily. They were supposed to protect their K-9 partners, to give them a dignified retirement. But Max had been thrown aside, like an afterthought. The more Jack uncovered, the angrier he became. He found out that Max's adoptive family had moved out of state without notifying the military or the K-9 program. There was no forwarding address, no way for anyone to check on Max's condition. For all Jack knew, they had simply dumped him somewhere where they no longer had use for him. With each new revelation, the pieces of the puzzle came together, but Jack felt a deeper sense of betrayal. Max had given everything to the military. He had put his life on the line, protecting soldiers and saving lives. And this was how he was repaid. Jack couldn't understand it. He always thought the bond between a soldier and their K-9 partner was something sacred, something unbreakable. But the truth was clearer now. Max had been just another tool, another asset, to be discarded once he was no longer useful. "I'm going to make this right, Max," Jack said, his voice firm with determination as he stood in the backyard, looking down at the dog resting peacefully beside him. "I don't care what it takes, but I'm going to make sure the people responsible for this answer for what they did to you." Max's tail gave a small wag in response, as if he understood Jack's promise. His eyes were soft and trusting, knowing that Jack would protect him. It was then that Jack realized that this wasn't just about making things right for Max. It was about holding those in power accountable for the way they treated the animals who served their country. Max, and so many others like him, deserved more. As Jack began making plans to take action, his thoughts shifted to the future. He had come to terms with the fact that the road to recovery wasn't just about healing Max's body, it was about healing the scars of betrayal. Max would never forget what had happened, but with Jack by his side, he wouldn't have to. They would face the future together, one step at a time, and no one would ever be able to take Max away from him again. Jack's determination to right the wrongs done to Max grew stronger each day. The more he dug into Max's past, the clearer it became that someone needed to be held accountable for abandoning the K-9 veteran. Max had served with honor, putting his life on the line countless times. To see him discarded as if he were just another expendable tool angered Jack to his core. After months of research, Jack compiled a stack of documents and records, proof of neglect of an entire system failing a loyal companion. He had contacted the right people in the military, spoke to former handlers, and even tracked down the family who had adopted Max, only to find they had no interest in taking responsibility for what had happened to him. They had moved away, their new address a mystery. It seemed like the perfect storm of irresponsibility and indifference. Jack felt betrayed not just by the system, but by people he had trusted in the past. But Jack wasn't the type to back down. He had seen too many battles, too many hardships to let this one slide. He had already reached out to a local animal rights organization that specialized in cases involving retired service dogs, and together they began to formulate a plan. There was no way Max's story could go unnoticed, not after everything he had been through. They would expose the neglect, they would demand justice, and they would make sure this kind of thing never happened again. One morning, Jack made his way to a meeting with a lawyer, a woman named Sarah, who had years of experience fighting for the rights of military animals. Her office was small but well organized, with framed photos of her cases lining the walls. Jack sat across from her, feeling the weight of what he was about to do. He wasn't just fighting for Max anymore. He was fighting for every K-9 that had ever been abandoned after serving their country. "I've got everything ready," Jack said, sliding the folder of documents across the desk. "I want to make sure Max gets the justice he deserves, and I want to make sure no one else has to go through what he did." Sarah nodded, flipping through the papers. "This is a solid case," she said, her voice firm with conviction. "We can start by putting pressure on the military to answer for what happened, but it's going to be a long road. There will be resistance. These kinds of things don't get fixed overnight." "I'm not backing down," Jack replied, his voice steady. "I won't let them sweep it under the rug. Max deserves better than that." Sarah smiled, a hint of admiration in her eyes. "I can see that, and I'll help you every step of the way." With the support of Sarah and the animal rights group, Jack began the process of filing official complaints and demands for an investigation. They contacted the press, made sure that Max's story was heard by the right people, and began gathering support from fellow veterans, animal advocates, and even the public. The more people that knew about Max's mistreatment, the louder their voices became. Weeks passed, and the momentum started to build. News outlets picked up the story, and people everywhere began to rally behind Max. The pressure was mounting on the military, and Jack felt a renewed sense of hope. It wasn't just about righting the wrongs of Max's past. It was about ensuring that every retired K-9, every loyal companion, was treated with the respect they deserved. Finally, Jack received a call from Sarah. "We've got a response," she said, her voice tinged with excitement. "The military has agreed to launch an investigation into the mishandling of retired K-9s. They're starting with Max's case." Jack felt a surge of triumph, but it was tempered with the knowledge that the fight wasn't over yet. It was only the beginning. The road ahead would still be long, but for the first time in a long while, Jack felt hopeful for the future. Max had suffered, yes, but his story was no longer just a tragic one. It was a rallying cry for change. Max, lying beside Jack as he listened to the phone call, gave a soft whine, as if sensing the significance of the moment. Jack looked down at him, smiling warmly. "We did it, buddy," he said, scratching behind Max's ears. "We're going to make sure this never happens to another dog like you again." Max's tail wagged weakly, and Jack knew, in that moment, that they had already won. The fight for justice was far from over, but they had made their mark. And with each day that passed, Max was healing, body, heart, and soul.